Well, with Genesis, you will notice that we've always taken, well, perhaps since apart from that very, I can't remember, John Anthony was probably credited as a producer, but we've always considered ourselves co-producers. And I think we've always felt happiest, and we learnt this with John Burns, of having someone who's fundamentally an engineer but is also can co-produce. So that he's got to be someone he's got his hands on the knobs, he's technically understands all that, but he's got an ear and can therefore help you with all the other stuff that's necessary. That's what we're looking with Genesis. Is some groups have a producer who's very much, decides everything and does all that. We kind of always know what we're aiming for, really, but we need sort of help sometimes in just sort of realising that. And, I think after John, we had Dave Henschel, who was someone we knew. Well, actually, there was a guy in between. But Dave Henschel was the next significant producer we had. Was someone we'd met in earlier days when we did, I think it was Nursery Crime. He was one of the tape ops. And is someone that Phil had done a bit of work with. And he came in and he was good at taking us to the next level. But perhaps he was always a little bit, he wasn't very good at big drums. So we went up to and including Duke with him. And then we decided we just wanted to get sort of more size out of everything. I was always a massive fan, as I think we all were actually at various times, of the sound, of John Bonham's sound. I just love that sound. I could listen to Led Zeppelin just for the drums. I don't really care about the rest of it. It's just such a great sound, particularly in those days when not everybody was doing it. And we wanted that live sound. And so we tried to get it on Squonk, on Trick of the Tail, but we failed miserably because the producer was just the wrong guy. It was a very small drum sound, didn't get it nearly big enough. And it wasn't really until, I think, later on, after Phil had done sort of work with Peter on his third album, and then obviously with Hugh Padgham, who was involved with that album, and later worked with Phil's on his first solo album, well, on all his solo albums, actually, most of his albums, and then he worked with us on Abacad. We managed to get that big drum sound. Because the rest of the sound, to some extent, we could take care of ourselves, I felt. Keyboards, you've worked with me. To some extent, you kind of define it yourself a bit. Mike always does the same thing with guitars. He starts off with a guitar that's sounding pretty good, and then he goes through 25 other guitar sounds, and then after a couple of days comes back to the original guitar sound and plays it on the old guitar. But no, that's not fair. It's not fair at all. But to some extent, you know kind of what you want. And I think what you want is someone who can get the sound. I think drums and voice are perhaps the most important things that the engineer-producer can get, and that's what you're looking for, really. And the rest of it, you hope you can sort of take care of. So what do they add? Well, I think they add a lot. Because, but without them, you'd have had to get somebody else.